Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely welcome. Thank you for finding your way here on a hot summer's day, glorious English weather, provided specially for the event. And a particular thank you to Liz Truss for arranging this, for bringing together right-thinking people. Because it is so important that whatever wing of politics you're on, you're interested in ideas. And sometimes we think that the Blob is against us, the universities are against us, and therefore the intellect is against us. But we must never accept that, because however strong the Blob is, we need to be generating ideas that make conservatism fit for government in this country, and in other countries too. And I've been given a very clear title for today, which is The Blob. The Blob. It sounds like one of those 1950s films, doesn't it, when they had killer ants and things like that. And this is The Blob, draining the swamp of the permanent bureaucracy. Now, I have a nasty feeling that if you wanted to drain a swamp, Natural England would tell you that you weren't allowed to without a license. But we're not going to ask for a license from Natural England to drain this particular swamp. We're going to do it for ourselves. But let me say one thing to start with that I think is in the utmost importance. And that is, of course, to quote from Julius Caesar, or at least the play about Julius Caesar. I'm being relatively modern today, as I'm sure you realize, only going back to the mid-50s BC. The fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. It's no good saying that there are people that are against us and it's all impossible. We need to say there are people against us and therefore we will charge. We will put our heads down and charge and push through what we believe in, because if you have in a democracy a majority behind you, that is what you can do. You do not need to accept the status quo. You do not need to be bullied into going along with what the Blob wants. You have to realize what power there is at your disposal to make what you want to happen, happen. And this is fundamental, because we have seen, not just with Sir Keir Starmer, but with some Conservative Prime Ministers too, this complaint that they pull the levers and they're not connected. I've been to old redundant railway stations, and they're rather marvelous. They have those beautiful old signal boxes. And literally, the levers get pulled and they are connected to nothing. They are there, they are decorative, they remind you of a past glory, they make you think of Thomas the Tank Engine or whatever it is you happen to like, but they do nothing. And that has been a complaint of Sir Keir Starmer, of Boris Johnson, of others, about why the state is not working. But all the systems are there within our Constitution to make it work if we want to. It is not the fault of the permanent bureaucracy. It is the fault of the laws, and the laws are the fault of the politicians. And we should not shy away from the blame and blame bogeymen. We should blame ourselves for what we decided to do. And you've got to go back, not particularly far, not back to the 1st century BC, but just to 1972. Because the European Communities Act 1972 was the largest export of power from British politicians abroad. And once that was done, decision-making in this country went from politicians to officials, not just in Brussels, but in the United Kingdom as well. It was deliberately intended to, and it was a fake, it was a phony, it was a cheat. Because British politicians would stand up in the House of Commons and they would say, I'm opposing that, I think it's dreadful that we shouldn't have biscuits that are high in fat or ones that taste nice. You know, we can only have ones made of sawdust according to EU regulations. It's absolutely scandalous. And then they'd go off to the European councils and they would abstain. They liked abdicating power. I had a conversation when I was leader of the House with a fellow minister. We were talking about bringing power back from a particular large, inefficient, expensive quango to the minister. And he said, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because then I'll get blamed when it goes wrong. And if I were in the category of people who hits their head against a brick wall in desperation, that is what I would have done, because what is the point of being in politics if you don't want to make the choices? So let me tell you how we make the choices. One other quotation. Now, some of you will know the great Bill Cash, Sir William Cash, who has been one of the most assiduous campaigners for conservatism in my lifetime. And he has taught me so much, but he takes the trouble to read legal judgments and then pass on the important bits to people like me who haven't read them and probably wouldn't understand them if I did, not being a lawyer. But he found this key part of the Rwandan judgment from Lord Reed. And it's an easy paragraph to remember because it's paragraph 144, a number we all know because it's the last number when you're learning your times tables, and therefore with 144 there is always a good deal of relief, isn't there? You've finally got through, you've done it. And with 6 children, I've done the times tables an awful lot in recent years. So we get to a gross, 144, and what does it say? It's really important. It says, in any event, the principle of legality does not permit a court to disregard an unambiguous expression of parliamentary intention. It is so important because that paragraph of that judgment is the beating heart of our Constitution and has been for hundreds of years. If you want to start Parliament at 1265, do. You can argue for a slightly earlier date. But that the King in Parliament is the highest constitutional authority, the High Court of Parliament makes our laws, is how you drain this swamp. Because it is still clear that a law passed by Parliament overrides everything. There is no law that can overtake it. There is no international law that is superior to it. In this land, it is the law. And that is how you drain the swamp, because the swamp came from the law. It came from the European Communities Act, into which you then you connected, you plugged in the bureaucracies and the quangos. Why? Because they were plugged into European law rather than to British law. So it made sense to have Natural England and its predecessor quangos running according to a non-ministerial set of guidelines, because they weren't answerable to ministers whilst we were in the EU. They were answerable to a higher authority. That higher authority has gone. It's been removed. And we face this challenge now. It's really interesting. Is there anybody here who thinks that dreadful man who was sentenced to 22 years in prison, served 14, is now out on the streets, should not be deported to Pakistan? Anybody in the room? Is there a single hand that will go up? And I'm not an auctioneer, you're not bidding, but not one. Everybody wants this man removed, including the socialist government. They have not a chance of removing him. He won't go. How can I say that? Well, they're going to pass a law that will say he should go. But they won't be able to implement the law because the law will be subject to the Human Rights Act. And his human rights will mean that we are not allowed to deport him. It's going to be as simple as that. But there is a way to do it. And that is to repeal the Human Rights Act, to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, and to resile from the Refugee Convention. These are all within our control, and then you get back to decisions being made by ministers who are subject to that greatest human right, which is the ballot box. If they don't govern properly, we can vote them out. I happen to know this quite well because a couple of years ago I was voted out by the good people of North East Somerset because they thought that people like me hadn't governed properly. It's a wonderful purgative for our system to make sure that we are governed properly. But we need to allow people to govern. So step one in purging the swamp is to remember the power that Parliament has and to use it by repealing the Human Rights Act. But that's only number one on my list. Number two on my list is the Climate Change Act. The Climate Change Act is stopping us. One person agrees with me. That's very nice. Thank you, sir. A few more. He was paying closer attention to what I was saying, so he gets a gold star. Anyway, the Climate Change Act is a disaster. In 2000, the UK had 90% of the GDP per capita of the United States. And we had energy prices, electricity prices that were the same. We now have electricity prices that are 4 times as high and GDP per capita that is 60% of the United States. We're poorer than Mississippi. We must repeal the Climate Change Act because it stops ministers doing sensible things. It's one of those instructive laws that overrides other laws, and it is a menace to how we are governed and is making, as I normally say, cold and poor, but at this time of year it's hot and poor because we're not allowed air conditioning to meet our targets. I'm trying to provide a bit more hot air to warm things up a bit, but nonetheless, it is a disastrous act that is trying to achieve something that is pointless because we're making no difference to the climate. If we all stopped breathing, the climate would go on climating away without our additional little bit of carbon dioxide. We've then got to get rid of the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, which gives civil servants power over ministers, which means that ministers cannot govern in the way that they would like to. It's amazing. New Labour was very clever. What was pretty much the first thing Tony Blair did? An order in council to allow Alistair Campbell and Jonathan Powell to give instructions to civil servants. What was the last thing they did pretty much? The Constitutional Reform and Governance Act that made this very thing illegal, by statute rather than by prerogative power. A quite remarkable closing down of ministerial ability to get things done and to use their own political advisors. So Cragg must go. So must the act that introduced a Supreme Court. This country does not have a separation of powers. That is an American political concept, not a British one. We have the king in Parliament, and what do you have in Parliament, or did you have until 2007? You had the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. We had a single, unitary system for a single, unitary country. America has a different system for a federal country. Both work for their own type of nation. Theirs does not work for us. So put the Supreme Court back into Parliament. Then it is at least linked to the political nation, independent in judgment, but not independent from the political system. And whilst we're busy getting rid of a few acts, let's get rid of the Equality Act, because and you realize we've appointed some lady to appoint the judges who thinks that merit isn't the only reason for appointing judges. Heaven help us what our judges will be like. They'll be even worse than the wonderful and wise people we have now. There'll be a gradual downgrading of our judiciary by this ridiculous appointment made by, of course, the great David Lammy, one of the most sensitive and considerate politicians of our time, whose words are always weighed with the greatest care and deliberation. But we need to get rid of the Equality Act because there is one equality we should have in our law, and that is that we are all equal under the law. So let me go back to where I began, with the title, Draining the Swamp of the Permanent Bureaucracy. We have the legislative means to do this. We need to have the will and the plan. The blob will squeak and squeal as blobs squeak and squeal. I don't quite know what blobs do when pressurized, but think of it being squeezed like a balloon and it'll pop out in other directions. But legislatively we can push it through, and we must. We need a majority in Parliament to do it. We need to push it through the House of Lords, but we need a fundamental reassertion of our ancient constitution, which has provided freedom and liberty and prosperity for over 1,000 years. The creation of England is 1,100 years next year, because of a constitution that has evolved over that period. Draining the swamp, getting rid of the bureaucracy, taking back democratic control is the right thing to do. The best form of government is one of the people, by the people, and for the people. We know how to do it. but the fault lies with us, not in our stars. Never forget that. It is we who have to change it. It is our efforts that will make it happen. It is down to Conservatives. Let us not hide behind bogeymen, but get on with the work that needs to be done. Thank you.